Welcome to another edition of Let's Talk Sales. And this time we have a very interesting personality for you to know and learn something from. He's been considered an architect of modern Indian retail. He has built brands, built sales organizations, and over 4 decades he's been at it. The other day, I met with somebody in a Titan showroom, and I happened to just talk about this gentleman. And this young Titan executive was in awe of this person. And I was really pleased to know that Bijou Kurien is held in such great regard. Welcome, Biju, to this edition of Let's Talk Sales.
Thanks, Roshan. Thanks for having me on your show.
So it's interesting because you started life. Let's find out how you started life. As I always like to ask, which school did you pass out of?
Well, I passed out of a school in Bangalore, which is called Clarence High School.
Okay.
And as in those days, you would normally study in a school close to where you stayed. And that is how I studied in Clarence. And then from Clarence, where I completed my 10th, I then went on to a Jesuit college called St. Joseph's College of Arts and Science, where I did my 2 years of what you might call as a pre-university course. And then after that was 3 years of a degree course, which was in physics and maths. Uh, and don't ask me why did I choose physics and maths. I think sometimes you just choose subjects which come naturally to you. So I happened to do well in those, both in school as well as in PUC. And then I thought that would be the most logical thing to get into. Uh, Not really having a clue as to what will I do at the end of 3 years. And that was the most interesting thing. So at the end of 3 years of my degree course, then questions were what should I do next? Those years, and this I'm talking about is late 70s. It was uh, the MBA program was getting to be popular, but not so well known. On the other hand, there was chartered accountancy, which a lot of people were talking about. And since that didn't specifically require a commerce undergrad degree, you could continue to, do chartered accountancy even if you graduated in physics and maths. But then I decided to do an MBA. And then because I was studying in a Jesuit institution, I loved the fact that XLRI in Jamshedpur was offering an MBA program. And hence I joined them from 79 to 81.
Wow. When you graduated from XLRI, did you ever dream of a career in sales, or did sales just happen to you?
Actually, I wasn't even sure because, in those days, the number of companies which were recruiting people were few. As you would know, in Calcutta, we had some of the old Boxwala companies who were recruiting. Then there were a few which were there in Bombay. And then, of course, the rest were scattered. There were very few companies in the other cities. Uh, IT had not started, so there wasn't too much of technology, there wasn't too much of consulting. So, consequently, because I graduated in both marketing and finance, my interest was in joining a marketing company. But if I didn't get that, I didn't mind a finance company, and I must mark the words didn't mind. Uh, what I then did was I applied. Uh, there are people who join an MBA who either have a engineering degree or are basic graduates. I happen to be a basic graduate, so sometimes even when companies select, they look for these pre-qualifications. Is he an engineer, or is she an engineer, or are they only basic graduates? And then I participate in a few interviews. One of the interesting companies which came at that point in time was Hindustan Unilever, now called Hindustan Unilever, but in those days it was called Hindustan Lever. And they came to campus, and then through 3 rounds of uh, selection, one at campus, one in Calcutta, and then finally one in Bombay. I ended up, being part of the Levers Management Trainee Program. So that's how I ended up being in Levers. Having got into Levers, I then realized that it's not always about, advertising. It's not about being going directly into product management, being a brand manager, looking at, advertising agencies, working with advertising agencies, being part of photo shoots. It wasn't all of that. The first thing that they did is, if you want to get into marketing and if you want to be part of the advertise, if you want to be part of the product management phase, then you necessarily need to have a good grounding in sales. So they had a very, very structured sales training program where over an 18-month period, you are actually going to get trained in sales, between working as a salesman at the entry level, graduating to what they called as a sales officer, supervising 7 or 8 salesmen at the next phase, and then going on to doing a rural development stint so that you get grounded in the reality of what Indian markets and villages are. And then after that,
Which is this
yeah,
something that I want you to try and emphasize, because many of our viewers face this question and they all want to join marketing straight away. So, when you had your first territory, what did it teach you which no classroom ever did?
no, it taught me a lot. First of all, it taught me how to speak Hindi because I'm coming from Bangalore and I really didn't know how to speak Hindi. I studied Hindi as a second language, but I didn't really know how to speak it. So I had told the people at Levers, the HR people, saying that, what I'd like to do is, I could go to Chennai because they didn't want to ask for Bangalore directly. So I said, I'll go to Chennai. Or if you want to post me for my training in Kerala, I know Malayalam. So these would be markets where I can speak the local language. Instead of that, when they were assigning territories for training, they posted me in a place called Jaunpur.
Huh.
So first I had to figure out where the hell is Jaunpur.
And they're very well known for imartis, huh, by the way.
Yeah,
Jaunpur.
exactly. Exactly. I discovered a lot of that kind of stuff. So, so I was posted. They told me it's Jaunpur. So I said, "Oh, hey, which region is this? Is it north? Is it east? Where exactly is Jaunpur?" Then finally we figured out Jaunpur is near Varanasi, 60 kilometers away. So they said, "You can go to Jaunpur." So I said, "Sure." So I went first to Delhi branch, and then after a 2 week orientation at the Delhi branch, I then moved to Jaunpur, trained from Delhi, reached Jaunpur, Varanasi, then another bus from Varanasi to Jaunpur. After reaching Jaunpur, then I met with the distributor, and that was my first shock because he said, "Oh, you have come here from the company." I said, "Yes." I said, "Didn't anybody tell you I was coming?" He said, "No, nobody told me you were coming." I said, "Oh." I said, "What about the previous salesman?" He said, "Oh, we haven't had one for the last 4 months." So I said, "Then who's been managing this territory?" He said, "Nobody has bothered." So then the first thing you have to do in levers is build up all territory records. So I had to sit there and figure out in the last 4 months how much goods were sent to him, how much had he sold, how much has he got in balance stock today, what has he run out of stock, all of the basic stuff. So, from building records to learning Hindi to working the market to then Jaunpur is, while it's your headquarter, you have a host of another 15, 17 towns which are in a radius of about 60 to 100 kilometers of Jaunpur, stretching halfway between Varanasi and Gorakhpur, all of which are part of your territory. So, figuring out how to be able to go to these markets, whether you should go there the previous night, go there the next morning, which are the places where you can stay. You're living on salesmen's allowances so that you
But the
understand what it
bhatta,
means.
the bhatta.
Yeah. So your daily, your DA, your daily allowance, your X market allowance, your outstation allowance, exactly what a salesman gets. And when you're going there in those days, I remembered if you traveled out and came back, you got 25 rupees for the day. And if you traveled out and you had to stay out in the night, you got 32 rupees for the day. And I said, oh, hell, how am I going to stay in a hotel, have food, work the local market, and come back? I mean, the only other addition to this was your transport from Jaunpur to that particular market. So it was in a way a trial by fire. And I can tell you, initially I was intimidated. But then as you work in this particular role and as you grow into it over a period of time, then you start beginning to love it. And you love it for several reasons. One is that when you work the market, you meet the dealer. When you meet the dealer, he tells you about market conditions, you discuss agriculture, you discuss MSP, you discuss crop prices, you discuss rainfall, you're discussing consumer behavior, you're discussing competition, and lastly, you're discussing how much will he buy from you. So there are so many things that you have in a conversation that you come back very enriched from just a mere meeting with a dealer. And I tell you, that is some of the best times I've had in my life in terms of really understanding consumer behavior. And in fact, one of the books which I read, uh, like that, we are like that only,
Ah,
by
Biju
author Rama
by
Vijayapurkar.
Rama
And when
Vijayapurkar.
she wrote that book, my memories of my stint in Jaunpur, my sales officer stint in Lucknow and in Kanpur, all that came flooding back to me, saying that really she's exactly describing exactly what I've gone through.
One of the things that I always feel about salespeople, if you want to be a good salesperson, is to have a strong iron cast stomach. Did you ever have any problems on that
I
count?
never did. I mean, I love food first of all. I love experimenting. I'm a non-vegetarian, so because of which that doesn't really worry me in terms of what I can and cannot eat. And you would, I would be surprised if in the morning for breakfast in Jaunpur, I would have kachori and jalebi. Neither of the two was ever part of my breakfast in any other city that I lived in. But that is the breakfast in East UP, and that's what I would really, you
Well,
know, look forward to every morning.
excellent. And this is something that people should realize. You never get an opportunity to do that again in the rest of your career. You know, you will be visiting as some boss and they'll be taking you to some really important restaurant and stuff like that. So, here is what I also want to ask you, simple question. Do you think, because you were leading companies and you were a CEO and stuff, did this experience in any way help you do a better job as a CEO?
Absolutely. In Titan, for example, we constructed a management training program exactly similar to this. I said, I experienced it and I've gained a lot from it. And I want to make sure that this is the basis on which we actually train the people who join us. So, all the MBAs that we used to recruit as part of a management training program, we used to post them in the field.
Hmm.
That is one. Secondly, and then they used to go through the same experience. We were considerate to the women because we'd post them in softer territories, and the men, of course, got rugged out wherever they were. So that was one consideration that we made. The second part of it is that there are also people who had joined the organization in functions such as design, marketing, and some of them, for the purposes of growth, needed to understand other domains before they actually start taking on senior responsibilities. So the just completed managing director of Titan, Mr. C.K. Venkatraman, I remember when he was the marketing head, I told him you should look after sales also. And he said, surprising. He said, I don't even know anything about sales. I said, there's nothing complicated. You can learn. So we put him in charge of sales of a brand called. Those days we were creating two different SBUs. So he was put in charge of Titan, the SBU, including sales. And while he was, always on the other side looking at the salespeople, now when he was actually involved in it, he kind of, it's like a duck taking to water. He kind of got so integrated into the sales system, and it really enriched him. And I think the growth that he's had in Titan, to a large extent, stems from the fact that he managed to make this lateral move. There were many people who were in marketing who wanted to grow, and we flipped them into sales. We said, do an area manager stint for a
Mm,
year,
mm,
learn how it is to be able to handle sales. And similarly, we moved a lot of people from sales also into marketing. And these are not graduates, these are frontline sales officers or people who did a supervisory role in sales. And we said that you've understood so much of the market. Now it's time for you to be able to come into marketing and make a difference there. So, this cross pollination, to my mind, I think is a phenomenal thing that we should do, because exposure enhances every individual. And most people tend to be within their comfort zone. They're afraid to move out of it. And the moment you put them out of their comfort zone, I think that's when they learn to swim, and that's when they learn new things. Otherwise, they tend to get ingrained into whatever they are doing.
Titan, Tanishq, Fast Track all became household names. How much of that success do you think came from pure marketing and how much came from great sales execution? Because one of the things I find is implementation of a marketing plan is doesn't get as much exposure as creating the marketing plan.
Yeah. Now we call it a sophisticated name called GTM or go to market. Okay. But in those days, it was clearly, how do you build a brand, and how do you, create distribution, and how do you make sure that you build great customer relationship? It was three simple buckets which were there. Uh, and I think if you look at Titan, uh, it's clearly, we build great brands, and great brands are built on great products, great communication, and very compelling stories. If you look at what we've done in terms of the distribution, all of these are well guarded secrets unless they're actually available as products in places which have easy access to customers, which is where distribution comes into play. Uh, Distribution, we started in the beginning as being, we must control even the last point where the watch is actually going to be displayed. So, unlike some of our competitors who are actually doing it on the basis of supplying to a limited number of wholesalers, who in turn would sell it to whoever they wanted, and the company wouldn't know, what is happening at the retail point. In our case, we knew where what was happening at every retail point, and the feedback that we were getting from customers in terms of what they felt about the product pricing, etc. So that was the one and the important decision that we took very, very early in our distribution journey. Then layering on top of this distribution was the exclusive retail network, where we said that while we distribute through multi-brand outlets, our watches obviously have a certain share in the multi-brand outlet. What we need to do is to make sure that we are actually able to, you know, have a place which actually creates exclusivity in terms of distribution. And that is how we looked at the retail outlets. And those retail outlets are the places which then created the brand and allowed it to be able to be displayed in its finery, in its absolute finery, in what we call as the World of Titan stores. And then, of course, several other things that we did in terms of ensuring we were in department stores, we were in fashion boutiques, and stuff like that. So that way, we managed to create a presence for the consumer. In a category like watches, it's not just about selling watches, it's also about making sure that you're able to repair the watches. So, customer service became very, very important. So, what we then did was created a retail network for customer service which rival the retail network for selling the watches.
Hmm,
So customers felt as good about coming in to repair their watches as they felt about buying their watches.
very
So
interesting.
all of these are fine details that you need to take into account, because when you finally sell to a customer, what you're doing is you're building a relationship, and that relationship then lasts for the lifetime of either the customer or the product. And then that is what finally translates into what you might define in any form. In those days, it is called brand loyalty. Today, you might call it customer engagement, alignment, whatever fancy names which are there. But the fact is that the customer should be coming back, saying good things about you, and buying you more of it. That's the most important thing.
One of the things, Biju, all that you spoke about is a great touch and feel kind of experience that you grew through. And I'm getting a little concerned today. Like when I see something on internet, I don't know whether it's a real event or a fake AI event. How much do you think AI will impact salespeople? And how can a salesperson buffer themselves against this kind of, does he really understand? Like you said, the Jaunpur experience, everything gave you a real sense of knowing what is there in those markets. And I'm
Yeah.
afraid today the youngsters coming out are watching so much of AI built stuff. Will it in any way impact them?
So I think there are two parts to it. One is there is no substitute for working the market. There is no substitute for face to face communication between your seller or your buyer, whether it's a consumer, dealer, distributor, anybody in the value chain. There is no substitute to that communication because there are elements of that communication which go back to help you to be able to think through as to how the brand is performing, how your policies are playing out in the marketplace, what is the kind of things that competition is doing, how do consumers think about your brand, how do they evaluate you in the context of the choices that they have. All of this, there is no substitute. You can do, rear window, rear view mirror activities like market research. You can scour a whole bunch of data which is available. But at the end of the day, what you must realize is this is published data which is actually available. And that published data is probably the summary of a whole bunch of insights which are there. And from that published data is what AI is finally being able to churn together and put a summary and give it to you. So you get very distanced away from the reality of the marketplace. The second thing is that AI enables you to understand a market at a very broad level. And normally it's at a mega trend level, markets, structures, consumers' behavior. It doesn't tell you anything about dealers. It doesn't tell you anything about distribution. It gives you some statistics, but doesn't give you the feel. So you need to actually understand how the market works, and there is no substitute other than working the market there, having those conversations. You might use AI to be able to supplement that knowledge. You might be able to use AI to be able to park a lot of what you've heard and then to be able to create some meaningful understanding out of that mass of data that you might have collected yourself, and then compare that what you see which is publicly available. So if you ask me, I don't think it can substitute. There are certain human elements because there is, for example, persuasion in selling. There is empathy. There is a certain level of comfort and trust that you need to build with whom you're having a conversation, whether it's a distributor or whether it's a dealer, whether it's a B2B sale or whether it's a B2C sale. So, even in a retail company, for example, you need to sometimes convince a landlord to give you a property. You need to sometimes convince a salesperson to join your company. So, in every bit of it, what you do have is communication. So, there's no substitute for communication. AI can't help you on communication. So, that is something that you have to really use and build yourself.
Great. So let's talk sales is essentially for people who are a little confused about what. If you were to give advice to a Bijou Kurien of 25 years, what advice would you give yourself?
I'll tell him that you have to go to the market. I mean, the reality is that there is a consumer, there is a geography, there are places where people reside, there are channels which they buy. So we might be thinking that everybody buys online, but the reality in India's market today is 75 to 80% of consumers buy offline. So there are stores which exist and will continue to exist. So just sitting in an office, looking at insights from, let's say, online channels is never going to give you any understanding of the market. It'll tell you why people bought on your channel, but it'll never tell you why people never bought you. It'll never tell you why people, bought on other channels which you don't have any knowledge of. So what does happen is that you have to be in the market to be able to understand what is happening in the market. You cannot take a 10 or a 20% slice and say that I know the market. And that is unfortunately the reality that I see with a lot of the young startups who believe that they understand the market, understand the domain, without ever having stepped into a store, all on the basis of some statistics that they are generating out of some channels that they sell through.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Biju. This has been great talking to you, but I have a few rapid fire questions for you, just three of them, if you don't mind. Is there a book that you would recommend that every salesperson should read?
Well, I don't think there is one book per se. I mean, there are a few books. I mean, I love books by Zig Ziglar on selling, and he writes some beautiful books in a very, very breezy style. So that is one part of it. But selling is also about persuasion. It's about, so when you think of, say, somebody like a Stephen Covey, and people like that, in terms of the kind of persuasive principles, habits that you have to be able to imbibe, those are some of the things that you also have to think about in terms of selling. Secondly, we also have to remember that, there's diversity. So, as much, I mean, I love Rama's book and all the books that she writes because she writes it in such an earthy manner, and she writes what we don't normally read in several of these others who write about marketing and markets. So I think that's the other thing that you have to really understand, because India is not one India. We are like some several, layers of the onion that we have to peel to even understand what the core is. So I think that's important.
Wonderful. Over the years, Biju, is there one habit that you picked up which really helped your career?
Listening.
Hmm.
Frankly, it seems like such a simple thing, but I have found it to be the most effective way of communication. If I have interest in listening to what you are saying, you are encouraged to talk. You start over a period of time believing that what I'm saying, what you are saying to me, I'm actually understanding, absorbing, I'm caring about the fact that I'm listening to you. And some of the things that I see with salespeople is that, they tend to launch into a sales fusillade as soon as they meet somebody. They don't even know what that person is. They don't know what his needs are. They don't even know whether he's, pro, anti them. Now, none of that can actually happen. You have to be able to launch basis what, if you think of it from a war perspective, your enemy has got a certain level of preparedness. Unless you sit and understand what that level of preparedness is, there is no point in you just shooting off something. So, you have to be able to listen very carefully. Once you've listened, then you have the opportunity to be able to figure out, yes, this is what that person is meaning. If I have this standard pitch that I was going to launch onto them, I have to modify this pitch to be able to take into account what their thought process at this point of time is. I have to decide whether I have to continue pushing or should I step back, whether I can conclude my sale today or whether I think I might need a second meeting to actually conclude the sale. So each one of these are things that have to go through your mind, but it'll only come from listening.
Thank you so much, Biju. A last bit, any advice to somebody contemplating a sales career?
I think if they're looking at a sales thing, this is the one job they can be assured which will not get replaced by technology.
Ah, really? I like that.
Yeah. Because, as long as they are in India, they're going to continue to be looking at markets. Uh, I cannot think of a robot selling. at this point of time. I can think of call centers getting enabled by AI and technology, but I cannot see, you might be able to do a initial shortlisting of prospects, but to conclude a sale, you will then need a human to be able to do it. So sales in any form, physical or digital, will always be enabled by humans. So I think they should all think of starting with a career in sales. It's basically the foundation on which they can build the rest of what they want to do. Once they build sales, easy to move into HR. It's easy to be able to move into marketing. It's easy to be able to rise to the top of the organization.
Great. Thank you so much, Bijou, and really wish you all the very best. It's been great talking to you, and I hope whatever you gave the advice to the young people today, they will listen to it and benefit from it. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for talking sales
Thanks,
with me.
Roshan. Thank you very much. It was wonderful to have this nice and breezy chat. Loved it. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.